Welcome to .social, the first podcast to explore the world of decentralized social media. Each episode, host Mike McCue talks to a leader in this movement, someone who sees the Fediverse's tremendous potential and understands that this could be the internet's next wave. In this episode, Mike's talking to Paul Frazee, the CTO at Bluesky. The two chat about Bluesky's meteoric growth, the principles behind Bluesky's architecture, their vision for identity on the internet, and much more. This conversation was recorded inside of the Fediverse House at South by Southwest, so you might hear some background noise and other audio imperfections. There are also a few questions from the audience at the end. We truly hope you enjoy this conversation.
Well, let's set the tone right from the get-go here. Hang on one second.
We're doing a little tone setting. What are you guys doing, man?
There we go.
Good to see everyone. All right.
Yeah. Got to put on your wings. See if I can get it over the jacket. This will take me about 30 minutes. So just hang with it.
Paul asked me, do you mind if I put on my butterfly wings before, during the talk? And I was like, no one's ever asked me that question before, but the answer is default yes, absolutely.
This is serious
stuff. Man,
we need to take the right energy.
Exactly. Well, congratulations on, job well done, lots of hard work. You've seen a lot of growth recently.
Yeah. Thank you.
It's awesome.
Thanks. Yeah, it's been kind of a shocking experience, but it's very cool.
Yeah. Sort of a little PTSD going on there.
We're hanging in there. Yeah, there were some pretty intense situation room calls.
Yeah, exactly.
There was a period there where we had about 1 million people a day signing up.
Yeah.
And, yeah. Part of you is clapping like when it's happening to you, and part of you is. But everybody held it together really well, and we managed to survive it. The architecture held up, actually, which was the really important thing.
Yeah.
When you have so much novel tech, is it going to survive a growth spike like that? And I was really pleased to find out that it held up. So, good stuff.
Yeah, great stuff, man. Well, just to help understand the audience here, how many of you, show of hands, are developers? All right, engineers, excellent. How many, we got Peter Cottle here in the audience who's building threads. Let's see, how about creators, content creators? All right,
okay.
Excellent.
Great.
I love it. Activists. All right, there we go. Excellent.
Cool.
And all right, well, this is good. We have, there's a lot of different types of constituencies, in the Fediverse, and this is very much a grassroots movement right now.
Yeah.
And when I say Fediverse, sometimes people are like, oh, that's only ActivityPub stuff, and I'm like, no. It's the broader social web. I think of it as Proto and ActivityPub. You think of it the same way? Or?
I do. You do run into what's in people's heads versus the commonality. So depending on what I think they're asking, I might say, oh, that tends to describe ActivityPub. But it's spiritually quite close, and the objectives are the same. So I am positive on that association. But one of our users came up with a good term for our ecosystem, which, since it's the AT protocol, they called it the atmosphere, which actually worked really well.
I love the atmosphere.
Yeah, it worked.
That's a great one.
Yeah, that was a really good find. I was jealous that I didn't think of that one.
And it goes well with the wings.
Yeah, so. It's got all those.
Well, so when you think about the first principles for how you've architected Bluesky, what have been some of the most important first principles for you?
Yeah. So there's a lot of ways to attack this one. I'll start with in general, the goal of what you're trying to do is establish independent publishing and independent distribution, right? And there's been a push and pull inside of basically all internet technology from the get-go, where the web really nailed independent publishing, and it still effectively does that. You can still set up a website that you run the servers for and have a lot of control over. But that's only really half the equation. And once we started to get into the more kind of app world, it started to become really obvious that distribution was a huge part of the publishing equation, which is where social networks started to rise, and where you and your crew working on RSS from the get-go were ahead of the curve. It was capturing correctly, people are not always going to go to your website.
Yeah.
And so eventually the social networks really took control over the distribution side, in addition to the other kinds of just socializing aspects of social networks. And what you gotta push on that. You can't leave the distribution to be closed in the way that it is, because that really, it's to the extent that minor algorithm changes end up ruining business models for people. So you see existing creators pushing back on that in the form of newsletters like Substacks. That's a really great example of independent distribution. They're just using email, right? That's for the particular form of blogging, the newsletter model through email is so perfect, right? But for social networking, email doesn't cut it. So you need something that's a little bit more intelligent and able to persist over what people like about social networks, while still having a level of independence. And that's what the entire Fediverse is focusing on, is making sure that there's an independent method, an open system for the distribution side of things. So that's, I think that's how to describe that.
I mean, I do think that's a very, very big deal. You know, earlier today we had Molly White on, and she, if you don't know her, just go to mollywhite.net and you will see everything that she's publishing, all of her writing. She has 3 blogs. She has YouTube videos that she posts. She's got podcasts that she does. Just go to mollywhite.net. And how cool is it that I can just say, go to mollywhite.net, right? I mean, that's really the way it should be. And she doesn't care whether she writes something that offends Elon. And then Elon, I asked her in an earlier panel, like, hey, how likely is it that Elon's going to ban you at some point in the next year? And she's like, highly likely. But that's not going to ruin her business, right? And that kind of independence for people who are making content is incredibly important. And of course, that's what the web has always been about. But somehow along the way, we've sort of lost track of that, because we put things on platforms that are, specific to that platform, and then we sort of tie our business to that platform.
Yeah, it's understandable that it happened too. Like the work that's been going on in the different federated technologies, like was not exactly easy. And so those companies were tapping into the fastest way possible to build the kind of experiences that people wanted to have. And now just the technology standards are just catching up to it. So in many ways, this is about the commodification of the patterns that we've established work and that people want to have, which is, happening also at the same time that there's some dissatisfaction with the structural aspects of it. So great, let's go ahead and make the move. And
by the way, any founders, any entrepreneurs out there? All right, nice.
Cool.
Excellent. And we're going to do Q&A here in, about halfway through the discussion. If you are someone that wants to build an app that relies on community, it used to be that you had to build the entire community stack yourself and then hope that people would come to that community and build a profile, figure out who to follow, right? But that's no longer the case.
Yeah, exactly. That's it. Like, one way I like to say this, I don't know if this resonates with anybody when I say it, but it's like teaching the internet how to do social. So, because what the internet does is it's a giant collectively shared and owned thing. So whenever you start to tap into these Fediverse technologies, you're tapping straight into that existing network, and getting the user base initially is such a challenge. Getting an initial enough activity going on, things like that. So even if they're not locally your users, and we ran into that cold start problem ourselves because we actually did it's a separate technology with the ad protocol. So for a while, people are just like, I showed up and I looked for my favorite people. They weren't there, so I bounced, right? So that should just stop happening. That should stop being a factor entirely in how these things go. So now you're lowering the threshold costs for new products to come into play, and that means that there's just way more opportunity for people to build something better. And if it's not us, it's the next person, right? With each of these projects. In some ways, we kind of want to make sure that we stick to well-established patterns with what we're doing with our work, because we know that works. But even more adventurous people can come afterwards, and that's great. That's absolutely what should happen. But it's not just the people working on application experience that's important, but like also, again, I'm going to harp on this like independent distribution thing. You've seen things like YouTube creators are very frequently trying to solve their independent distribution. There's a project called Nebula. It's kind of like also what musicians try to do with Tidal. They're like, look, this is the distribution. We need to have some control over this thing. If the cost of building your own sort of focused on your art and your craft platform that gives you control of your distribution can happen, and the cost can get low enough that you're able to integrate right back into the whole network, then it starts to become way more viable for that to happen, which is so important for people that are trying to have online business as their actual business and rely on that revenue. So lowering the barriers to people building applications, I think, is just a very important next step for where the internet needs to go.
Yeah, and you're one of the blog posts I saw your team post several months ago, which I thought was fantastic, is a call for developers.
Yeah.
And it outlined, you should check this out if you're interested in building new apps in the social space, either apps or back-end services. And I loved all the different ideas that you guys outlined for what people could be building.
Yeah.
There's a huge kind of greenfield of opportunity for new kinds of services. Like you said, more adventurous services.
Yeah.
It was amazing.
Yeah. I mean, again, this is shared across all of the Fediverse technologies that like they're designed with the ability to go off of the microblogging form. The microblogging is kind of like the obvious entry app into it, but all this infrastructure can be repurposed in so many different ways. A lot of applications share the same shape. It's just a different focus on different kinds of media.
Yeah.
But then now get into forums, now get into code sharing and collaboration tools. There's a lot of different things you can do. I personally, the one that I'm really waiting for is, this is maybe a bit of a flight of fancy, but I think a micro podcasting app should exist. You tie that to a sort of Clubhouse style, where you get into a room and you talk, and then you snapshot it and put it onto a feed. I'm waiting for somebody to do that because it's the app that I've been wanting forever.
On AT Protocol.
Whichever one works for them, you know what I'm saying? But it's enough of a harebrained thing that I'm hoping that, that's the one I'm hoping somebody will do at some point.
Yeah, there's an app called AirTalk. Have you seen that one?
I did, yeah. AirTalk or AirChat?
Or AirChat.
AirChat. That one was interesting. It was close.
Yeah.
Not quite what I wanted.
Yeah, not quite.
Yeah.
Well, and also, again, you have to create another account and get people to follow you, and I don't know why anyone would do that now.
It's So it should just be you do your sign in. Ideally, it's going to be like a single sign on kind of thing. So like you're used to, where you're just pressing a couple buttons, you're not going to enter anything.
Yeah.
And then it's just everybody that you already engaged with is there. It's going to be, you're still going to are they hanging out in that? So the further away from microblogging they go, it may, if it was like audio things, you may have to convince them to just open up this app and start to engage there. There's still a kind of locality of okay, I'll go big with it. When you have a connected network, compatibility becomes the walls, right? Yeah. So it's about are you engaging on the same kind of subset of the experience?
Yeah.
So there's still that aspect of it, but boy, it's a lower barrier than it used to be.
Yeah. And for developers who are thinking about building on protocols directly, which you don't necessarily have to do. There are APIs. There's other kinds of extraction layers, I'm sure, coming. But what advice or coaching do you have for folks in terms of ActivityPub versus Proto? How do you think about the differences
between the technologies?
Yeah, and when to use one or the other, even though they both have the same purpose and the same vision.
They are very similar in their goals. Oh boy, how do I put this? So, I would say that ActivityPub definitely has a really great strength on this kind of notion of communities that are represented by the servers themselves, and then the ability for them to bridge between each other through the perimeter. And so there's something actually very intuitive about that design, that you set up a service somewhere, and then just speak to the other services. So I certainly think there's a lot of intuition there, and in some ways I would be inclined to expect that it might be an easier sort of secondary addition into a more traditional approach to a service. I think you have to buy in a little bit more into the app protocol to leverage it. The app protocol tends to think more in terms of aggregating high scales of user data, because what it's trying to do is make the entire experience feel like one shared network. And the way that it does that is by actually functioning really similarly to the web, where every application is almost like a search engine. And it crawls across all of the activity of people that is being hosted on their own sort of, not quite websites, but they're almost like websites. So the application experience is just crawling across all the activity, gathering it together in big indexes and building an application experience out of that. Which means that the applications are sort of detached actually from your account, which is also in some ways a benefit. But it plays well into the high scales. Doesn't play as well yet into selective sharing of information. So if you're talking like right now, it's on our roadmap to get into like selective sharing. But if you're talking right now with that protocol, you're going to want to do public posting with it. And yeah, I think that's how I would pose it.
And how do you think about the bridge and bridging strategies?
There's incredible stuff happening there. What is Ryan's thing called?
It's called Bridgy.fed. Exactly.
Bridgy.fed.
There's a nonprofit called Anu.social.
Yeah, did he form that?
He did.
Yes.
With Anush.
Yes.
And really those guys are doing great work.
Yeah, so there are people out there building bridges directly between the two different protocols that, to a shocking degree, actually abstracts over the difference. When he first showed up talking about that project, I was good luck, I think it could work maybe, but I wasn't so sure that I told him definitely do that. And he surprised the heck out of me with that. So as a consequence of that, I think the way that you opt into it, at least in the Bluesky app protocol world, you just follow the account and then it okay, great, we're going to follow you. And it creates sort of like another account over on the other protocol. So if I'm a Bluesky user, it'll create an ActivityPub account. If you're an ActivityPub account, it'll create a Bluesky account that just sort of mirrors over the activity. And a lot of it works pretty well. I think I've seen likes transfer over. Am I right about that?
Likes and replies.
And replies, it's really pretty good.
Yeah, it's pretty good.
So cool. So it's definitely doable.
The only little wrinkle in the bridging thing is that you do end up having these two accounts and you're like, wait a minute, which account am I looking at here, right? So, I mean, though I do think there are things that can be done in the UI for Bluesky and other apps to kind of only show one of the accounts and, show the relevant one and things like that.
This sounds like a call that we need to have. What's being set up right now.
Exactly. We definitely do. And it's a little bit also of a sort of lead into identity. Right? Because that's if I, for example, I have a Mastodon account. I have a Flipboard account. I have a Bluesky account. I have a Pixel.fed account. If you search for me on the social web, you're going to see 8 versions of me, right?
Sure.
And then, but there's no way to just follow all of my accounts, right? Even though they can be bridged. And my Pixel.fed account, by the way, is bridged to Bluesky. And by the way, for those of you who want to do that, it's really easy. You just have Pixel.fed follow the Bridgy.fed account. And it's automatically then bridged to Bluesky.
Right.
So, and it looks fantastic.
Good.
On Bluesky, it's fantastic. So I link to it in my Bluesky profile.
Right.
But what are your thoughts around where do you see this going further? This is a little bit, kind of a hacky scenario now. How important and central is identity for you guys?
Well, very much so. Yeah. So from the perspective of the app protocol, like I mentioned when we were doing the side-by-side just a second ago, scale was a big part. But the other one was to make sure that identity is portable. And that was a really big thing that we were working on right from the get-go. So we solved that through these persistent identifiers, this kind of like a giant unreadable number that everybody's got that has the goal of being one thing that you can reuse across multiple different applications.
Right.
And it gets associated with a domain name. So I'm pfrazee.com. And that just actually maps internally to this like long ID.
Yeah.
And so the hope with that is that if you're migrating around between services or changing your handle at any point, which happens,
Yes.
that it still persists that identity. Because again, lowering friction is such a big part of what we're trying to do. And so if you start out with us and then at some point you're like, I can't anymore with these folks, that if you wanted to move somewhere else, you could do that and have really zero pain.
Right.
That all of your previous activity and all your follows and followers and everything that is a part of your social account, the hosting should just not be something you're hardbound to.
Yeah.
Because again, easy choice ensures that you're focusing on what does matter, which is what these companies are doing and are they representing your values effectively and what you need out of it. The protesting with your feet just needs to be baked in right from the get-go.
Right.
While your identity remains persistent throughout.
Right.
And it really has to do with like trying to set a baseline of like an individual like rights given to people, right? That you should be able to exist as a person outside of a corporate entity. That you are a maybe not even a pretty low priority customer for, right? Because otherwise, like, how much more do we want to like hand off any kind of individual rights to these companies?
Yeah.
You know, and speaking as a company, it's like fine because our job should be to provide a service to people, not to own their online identity.
Right.
You know.
Right.
So I think that is a more balanced and kind of just long-term feasible relationship that should exist there.
Yeah, 100%.
Yeah.
Yeah, and you know, I think the fact that you guys adopted the DID, you know, W3C standard, definitely worth looking at this because, you know, it's sort of like it's analogous to your contact book, your address book, and phone numbers.
Yeah.
Right? So, you know, I could, you know, maybe. You know, Paul decides to change his name, and I change his name in my address book, but I still has the same phone number. I can still reach you, and you might change carriers. You might decide you're on Verizon or AT&T, and I can still reach you. I don't have to think about that, right? And that unique identifier number, that's super powerful.
And it didn't used to be that way, right? Like there was a period where phone numbers were carrier specific, and so whenever you changed your carrier, you starting over. And you're getting those random texts like, "Hey, it's my new phone number."
Yeah.
When did that change? It was
a very important change. I think it was about 20 years ago.
Yeah,
something in that zone.
I think I remember it.
Number portability.
So they had to like do a big.
And it was a regulatory thing that happened.
So I actually should look up sometime how they solved it. But like, they eventually introduced the ability for the number portability that it carries over with your carriers. Pretty good for keeping a competitive market. Yeah,
exactly.
That's friction that should not be a factor in a choice.
I personally think that your choice around doing identity the way you guys have is going to pay off to be one of the most important and best decisions you guys have made. I think it's incredibly thoughtful and bulletproof for the future, and something I hope we can, adopt also in ActivityPub world and in other places. So there's an opportunity, I think, to rally around that holistically. One of the other things I always hear Bluesky people talk about is the concept of composability.
Sure. Yeah.
And for people who don't know exactly what that means, can you just elaborate a little bit on what is that? Why do you talk about that so much?
All right. So now I'm thinking about the hands raised earlier, and I have to kind of think about how to communicate this for the varied audience. All right. So a big part of what we have focused on with this is making it so that composability in this case, it's about collaboration amongst different services. I'll start with an example. The way that feeds work in the Bluesky application is that so we had this idea of feeds where you can go to a page inside the app, it calls itself a feed, And it could be about sort of anything that the creator wants it to be about. It could be a cat pics feed. It could be fungus pictures. I think we have one of those.
Yeah.
It could be the kid literature community. And it can also be sort of algorithms, right? Like one that is pretty good is quiet posters.
Yeah, I love that one.
That one's a hit. And that one is just like the people that you follow that don't post as much. This feed is just their posts when they do post, because it's so easy to miss them. You got some folks post a lot, some don't. And the way that all of them work across the board is that they are running on somebody else's servers. So somebody at some point sets up a server somewhere that is creating these feeds, and the Bluesky application reaches out to them to find out what should show up whenever a user visits the feed. And then it sends back basically a list of post URLs, which then hydrate into the full experience. We did that because we wanted to make it so that there's true algorithmic choice in this thing, because that's something that matters quite a bit. And so that's an example of composition. Where somebody else builds some entirely separate service, but it's able to work collaboratively with ours to drive something which feels, we call it, feels first party. We call it third party as first party.
Yeah, right? I love that.
Yeah. And I mean, RSS was in the same energy, right?
Yeah.
So we've done that kind of across the board. Everything about the system is designed to have that level of mixing and matching, and you can pull out an individual piece and reuse it in some way. In terms of how it renders out into the user experience, another major one is the moderation system does this as well. And I think I want to keep working on this because we could build it out more, but we call this one stackable moderation, where the exact same moderation service that we run can be set up by anybody else and subscribed to by users to help continue to refine down what they're dealing with every day. And help to reduce the noise. And I think actually we can go even further with that tool, and I'm excited to do that. So I think that approach kind of naturally came out of the engineering culture that we have.
Yeah.
But then we're happy about it because it allows us to, with the feeds and with the moderation, start to have some of the practical value show up of the whole conceptual notion of an open internet and delegating out power.
Yeah.
That it can actually be a part of the application itself.
Yeah.
So that it's not an abstract thing that's just sort of somebody tells you this app is decentralized and you go, cool, okay, and then you never think about it again. That there could actually be immediate benefits to people. Composition really enables that.
Yeah, there's like a Lego block kind of mentality, right?
Yeah.
You guys make Lego blocks. You allow other people to make Lego blocks. They can build things into bigger Lego blocks.
Absolutely.
And that's actually kind of amazing, because the level of innovation that I think is possible because of that is something we haven't even begun to see yet. There's a lot of really cool things that can be done with that.
I think so too. Yeah, I think 10 years out in particular, I think I'm really looking forward. If the tools that enable that composition continue to hold up, then like finding even more ways to have this mix and match could really turn into something interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, one of the things that some folks are just a little bit hesitant on as it relates to App Proto is how federated is it? When will it be federated? Also, ownership of it by a company versus, or W3C blessing of it.
Yeah.
What are some of your, how do you address some of those questions that people ask?
Yeah, so the design of the technology is federated. So I'll kind of start with where we're at, and then in a positive sense, and then I'll talk about like what we're pressing on. So first of all, 99% of everything is open source. The one bit that's not is we have a kind of an internal database that we built that's not open source, but there's an alternative version that's available. So all of it is open source. The specs are written up, so there's everything to work from, and it's the specs and the source code are licensed in such a way that other people can take it and run on their own. And then in terms of other people running infrastructure, we have already got people doing self-hosting of their data, and that's active in the network now. And we are starting to see people start to build alternative applications. Remember what I was saying before about the hosting versus the distribution. So we've got some good initial progress on the hosting side, and then the distribution side is what we're now needing to press on to get more active operators of it. The barrier at this point is less the technology and more the operational cost of running an alternative application, because you're syncing a big network.
Yeah.
The model that we have is this, by default, is this idea that you're trying to pull in everything, aggregate everything, so that you can give that big network experience. And so what we're pushing on now is starting to build out or work with the community to start to have partial views of the entire network, so that it costs less to run.
That's awesome.
Your instance of that. Yeah. Because that gradient matters so much.
Yeah.
Like we're at that stage now where there's a lot of this is still community oriented, where it's a lot of individuals that just have a wild hair and want to jump in and do something. And for them, like if you're asking them to spend more than $100 to $300, $300 is still pushing it, a month on setting up a server, it's asking a lot. So you want to be able to set up a nice scenario where these independent hosters can set up their own version of not just the hosting, but also the application.
Yeah.
And to do that, you just got to shrink down how much of the network that you sync.
Yeah.
And you do that by looking at the follow graphs of the users. And so,
right, that's awesome.
Yeah. Well, okay, and you guys just did this.
Yeah, exactly. That's a good idea.
Yeah. Hey.
Yeah.
No, that was I just discovered is that Flipboard just recently did this, and very excited about this.
And it works very well. Yeah.
Good.
Yeah.
The intuition on this is just like, every user, like we have a whole lot of people in Japan, and I just don't interact with the people in Japan. So if our server didn't sync them, I probably wouldn't know.
Yeah.
So everybody has their just sort of window of the world based on their follow graph and their interests that they are going to come into contact with. And if you could shrink down the sync set to just that, you hit like the cost optimality, right? Some of the informal benchmarks we did, we're pretty sure that at $100, you can, at minimum, hit like 1 million of the users in the network pulling in their activity. We'll love to see that. The higher that gets, the better, right, for that cost. And then that will really help the independent operation. And then, part of what I would hope is that you see more of these independent operators, but then over time, they continue to grow. But they're on that right gradient where they're putting in more money based on how many users they have and how committed they want to be. Yeah. And then eventually get all the way up to running their own instance.
Yeah. Community on demand.
Yeah. So it's a process, but I'm pretty optimistic about the direction it's going.
Well, you guys have done completely, in my opinion, you've struck a very good balance between, how much do you centralize versus decentralize? How do you think about the architecture? Short-term, long-term, and I've been incredibly impressed with the way you guys have been approaching it. We, as a developer, we've integrated ActivityPub and at Proto, double stack, as they say, 2-stack, and it's totally worth it because it gets you access to like the broader social web. There are people who are like Barack Obama posts on Threads. He's federated. It shows up on Mastodon. I bridged I can bridge that over to Bluesky. I can see it on Bluesky. It's awesome.
Yeah.
And then with Bluesky, you have AOC who's posting, she's fantastic to follow on Bluesky. So, and the cool thing is ultimately people could just search for Obama or AOC and hit the follow button. They don't have to know where is the person posting from.
Yep.
Maybe one day they're posting on Bluesky, the next day they're posting on Threads, the next day they're posting on Mastodon. It doesn't matter.
Yeah.
So I'm a big believer, and let's open it up to some questions here in the audience. Let's hear any. Yes. Oh, do we have microphones we can do like a handheld to get to someone that is asking questions? Yeah. Over here. Yeah.
Hey, What's up, Paul? What's up, Mike? So it's Alex in the back.
Hey.
So there's so many different questions I'd love to ask, like how and why did ALF take off early in the Bluesky community, or maybe shining a spotlight on like Peter Wong and his fund, or as well as Mark Cuban and the opportunities that that brings in terms of development in terms of the Fediverse. But the thing I really wanted to dig on, since you brought it up earlier, was about self-sovereign identity. And I wanted to kind of look at like your point of view on how much is ICANN kind of the final boss of the internet? And you're able to bring in domains and use those as a base of your identity. I do as well in Bluesky, which is brilliant. But for those of you who are thinking in that direction of self-sovereign identity and how we have this like one centralized entity behind it all, any advice you would give to teams that are pushing in that direction and trying to get a little bit lower in the OSI model? Is there any advice you'd give to those kind of teams?
Yeah. All right. So what Alex is asking about here, we use domain names for handles. And the ICANN is the organization that manages domain names throughout the world. So it is it a nonprofit? I don't actually know how that is structured legally. Yeah. But it is a multinational governance system that I think so far has done a pretty good job of upholding its mandate and staying relatively focused on just respecting the core of what domain names are for. The risk with any kind of organizational system is that an organization could fail at what its core thing is. Now, thankfully, I don't think there's any indication that ICANN is a problem, but I think probably what you're asking about, Alex, is whether or not there are alternative technical solutions to the same thing. Broadly speaking, that boils down to, could you use a blockchain to try to solve the problem? I know Alex, so I know. So we don't use, I'll start by saying that right now Bluesky doesn't use any blockchain technologies. However, in the realm of like, across the board, the evaluation that we're using with that Proto for anything is just, does it actually do the job that it's needed to be done for this? Is it actually a feasible approach to how this can be done? And in terms of like putting your posts on the internet, not a great fit in my opinion. Yeah, it just, you're not getting, the cost profile is insane for that. Per transaction, you're spending a lot of money. And it's very inefficient. The throughput is terrible. For usernames, it might make sense, but it would have to come from a point of view entirely from the expected outcomes working backwards, which means that it needs to be able to hit reliable costs that are not going to be subject to a lot of speculation, that it's going to have very fast resolution and reliable resolution, things like that. So it's really an engineering problem more than anything. I think there's a decent chance that it could be done. But it's also not necessarily something that we're pressing on right now. But that's also one of the nice things about the DID system. It's designed to open up to other approaches. So that could be done at the DID level, or it could be done at the username level.
Yes.
Oh. Hi, Paul. Nice to have you here. It's really cool to pick your brain. You have an extensive history beyond just working on AT Proto and Bluesky. Like prior to that, you worked on the Beaker browser, you worked on Secure Scuttlebutt some, and to some degree, like some of the lessons from Secure Scuttlebutt have gone on to influence Nostr and other approaches to distributed communication systems, for lack of a better word. I was wondering if maybe you could speak to some of the lessons you've learned along the way and how that has informed your current approach to building AT Proto.
Definitely, yeah. When the Bluesky team first got together, we actually all came from a similar heritage of the peer-to-peer world. And there was a lot of things that we all were feeling at the same time, having spent time working in these technologies, which was essentially, there can not be any steps backwards in how the technology works. Another way that I was putting it is that it can't be rocket science to implement a comment section. Right, which Secure Scuttlebutt and Beaker were conceptually and technologically really very interesting, but they tended to live entirely on user devices. They were peer-to-peer. It was like, if anybody here knows BitTorrent, that was how those technologies kind of fundamentally worked. So no servers were involved at all. And you had problems with scale. You had problems with account synchronization across devices. I'll put it that way. It's key sync is what I'm talking about. You had problems with reliable availability of information. And at some point, you have to recognize that interesting technology also needs to yield good affordances both for developers and for users. And that was what we walked in with, was like, that just you can't compromise on that. And the way we ended up squaring that was taking a lot of that technology that we had worked on and moving it into the server stack. Because the peer-to-peer technology, when it comes to this account portability thing, that's what it's designed to do. It's designed to abstract away the individual devices. But if you move it into the server, then you're able to have the high scale and the reliability of server infrastructure. And so that's in terms of the technology point of view, was the main sort of lesson carryover from that. But I actually wrote up a postmortem on the Beaker browser, which if you want to read a little bit more about that, just Google postmortem of Beaker, and it's like on the GitHub, and there's a couple of other things you might find interesting. Yeah.
We have time just for one more question.
So I'm asking this of a guy wearing wings, but I often think about the federated world as the good guys being on the side of angels. And you're creating these little universes that talk to each other and don't talk to others. And, one of the things in terms of the social engineering of this is thinking about universes that do talk to each other. And we are becoming farther and farther apart in terms of communication in our country overall. Have you thought about how people will talk to other universes versus just talking to themselves in the echo chamber?
Yeah, so you're talking about the kind of the cultural universes that people live
Yes.
in. And I mean, this is something that we talk about a lot. And it is, that's challenging beyond technological questions. Yeah. So, So what constitutes wisdom here is an open question. I think to some degree, I am less inclined towards the make sure that everybody gets a platform all the time sort of thing. I think that respect for people and having a positive connection with each other is quite valuable. In fact, I think one of the things that leads to a lot of conflict between people is just bad interactions across these universes, where they develop an even lesser opinion of each other whenever they do come into contact. So that the experience that they have with each other in terms of actually building, crossing that bridge, you got to be mindful of, like, it's not enough just to get them into the same space, because then they'll just argue, right? So how can we get people into a time with each other where they build sympathy and empathy for one another and actually come to like each other? And so to some degrees, I try to think of it less in terms of breaking out of filter bubbles and more in terms of encouraging just positive and convivial experiences with each other. And reducing that base level of toxicity or actually the term I like is torment, that the internet is just constantly subjecting you to. That is my best guess at how to move forward on that. But fingers crossed. It's a very hard one.
I'll just add a real life example. So I have a troll pen pal on Bluesky.
Oh, yeah.
And
Great.
so, I posted something about, the Elon Nazi salute. And this guy, who is clearly, an Elon supporter, right-wing, very, very right-wing, posted back, that was not a Nazi salute. And like, look, here's all sorts of other examples of like Obama giving a Nazi salute and so on, right? But what's really interesting though is like this guy, claims in his profile, like, I'm here to like actually talk to people and have real conversations, right? So I was like, all right, let's have a real conversation. And, every now and then I'll actually reply to him and he'll reply back and we'll like go back and forth and we'll, it's not like I convinced him, of anything, but at least I showed him the respect of like, hey, you have your opinion and I've got my opinion. And, I do think that was actually kind of cool. I feel like there's a little bit of an obligation, I think, that people have sometimes to like, not just be like, you don't know what you're talking about, right? And I do think that there's, sometimes you don't want to feed the trolls, but I will say that like it's kind of cool. It's kind of cool to be able to actually engage with someone like that. If I ever decide to, I can always block them.
Sure.
Right. But this person's been actually reasonably respectful back, and that's a start.
That's nice of Nice outcome. Glad to hear that.
Yeah. So
Yeah.
and it is nice because also on Bluesky and on Mastodon, there are ways to protect yourself, right?
Yes.
So I feel a little bit more willing to engage with people that I otherwise wouldn't. Like I would never do this on Twitter. That's just insane, right?
Yeah.
Because all the other trolls would come swarming, right? But I know if that were to happen on either Mastodon or on Bluesky, I could easily, just block those people and just never think about it again.
Both universes are putting a lot of thought into that side of it.
Yeah.
And actually a lot of the tangible effects of the more delegated out moderation is to find ways to have that slightly more hands-on kind of cool down.
Yeah.
And we're kind of constantly looking for new ways to take the temperature down on that sort of stuff. So that, in this case, what you're saying is that you felt comfortable even taking a shot at it.
Yeah.
That's a good step in the right direction.
Yeah. It is really great. And it's a testament to the work that you guys have done, that the Mastodon team has done. The Threads team has also put a lot of energy into this.
Yeah.
And I have to say, it gives me hope. That you can, if you know how to use the tools, you can actually engage with people and feel safe, and maybe try to start to bridge some divides. So I think that's a great question, and a great question to end on too.
Yeah.
We're sticking around, so feel free to come talk to us. We've got we'll be doing another discussion here soon, and then the Fediverse party tonight. So thank you again for the good questions and for taking the time to be here. We'll see you again soon.
Thank you, everybody.
Well, thanks so much for listening. You can find Paul on Bluesky at pfrazee.com. You can follow Mike on Bluesky at mmcque.bsky.social and on other federated networks. Post-production on this episode comes from Kaleidoscope. Lastly, if you're interested in this podcast, you might want to check out Surf, a new product from Flipboard. Surf the social web and create your own custom feeds. Learn more at Surf.Social. Until next time, we'll see you in the Fediverse.